Okay, so today we have just one session before a break, and then all the rest of our sessions after that break. That's because of various time zone, constrictions that we've had to work with. So this first session is called Deviant Women. And we're going to hear from ROBERTA MARANGI and then YIORGOS ZAFIRIOU. And I'll ask you to keep your questions until the end. We'll try and ask some questions that join the two papers together. And of course, you're also welcome to ask questions of the two individual presenters. So I'm going to begin by introducing ROBERTA. So the title of ROBERTA's paper was one of the ones that when we first received all of the expressions of interest really caught my eye, and even from the title I knew that this one had to be included. So it is The Folk Tales of Women's Bodies, from Anne Boleyn to Kim Kardashian. ROBERTA MARANGI is a PhD candidate and a teaching assistant in the School of English at the University of St Andrews. Her dissertation is about dynamics of power and gender in stories of opposite sex decapitations in medieval English literature. How good is that? Her interests also include violence, no kidding, both physical and social, in relation to gender, as well as the impact of medieval literature in contemporary medievalism. So, ROBERTA, I'm really looking forward to this paper. I'm going to hand over to you.
Hi, thank you so much for this introduction and for your kind words. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really excited to be talking to you about something that is very dear and very close to my heart. I'm going to share my screen now. Excellent. Again, thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. I find it fitting to be here in my final year of my PhD, since I started watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians in my first year to find solace and to watch something I thought was going to be very different from what I do on a day-to-day basis. We'll see it's not that different, actually. But as you can imagine, my other entry point is the story of Anne Boleyn as a woman who was beheaded, in fact, as the first anointed queen to be beheaded. Here I have for you a table of contents so that we can all see where this is going. I'm going to give you an introduction with my main argument, what I think brings together these two women, besides the fact that they had husbands who founded their own church. We're going to look at the rhetoric of female and royal bodies, and then we're going to look at specific instances of these rhetoric modes in terms of Queen's bodies and King's body, and then hopefully reach some conclusions. So I started my abstract, you might have seen it, with a misquote of the famous nursery rhyme, divorce, beheaded, died, divorce, beheaded, survived, with divorce, famous, besmirched. Trying to put together these two women whose life events have sometimes been incredibly uncanny. They are both the not so fertile mother, or the women who've had that are known as mothers, but have had issues with their fertilities and whose issues have been very public. They are the political woman who does not understand the game. They are the famous and the original hated women. But what is similar between those two women is not just these little snippets of event, but also there is an uncanny similarities in the way in which texts that are produced about them speak about them, both contemporary to their time and both to us. Anne Boleyn and Kim Kardashian have been and are still subjected to the same kind of rhetoric, which leads to the creation of folk tales, easy to repeat and easy to digest little stories centered around the separation and gendered assignment of mind and body, according to this paradigm in which the mind would be the reign of men and body that of women. The problem of the hated woman could then be neatly resolved not only by the reduction of these women to bodies, but to deviant bodies at that, whose meaning is detached from their personhood and is instead used to create a narrative that sustains and comforts old patriarchal stereotypes. I have gathered here for you a few headlines of the past few years, talking about both Anne Boleyn and Kim Kardashians. And I wanted to highlight some of the language that has been used, the interest in their appearances, from workout routines to the real appearances being unmasked, to this language of unmasking using conspiratory words and elusive languages. And indeed, it's very interesting to see Anne Boleyn being put together to Kim Kardashian, because in the word of Hilary Mantel in her podcast called Royal Bodies for the London Review of Books, it seems like the internet is still today abuzz with stories of Anne Boleyn as if everything was happening today. Indeed, this is just a sample, a few headlines, but the language is indicative of a larger discourse and a larger problems. Before the news outlet, before clickbait was a thing, here was the life of Anne Boleyn. As you can see, I've gathered here also a few facts about her to show that there are some gaps in our knowledge of her. And it is in these gaps of things we don't know about her that the insinuation about her body could start and could then propagate. But before, as I was saying, the news outlet, we had Nicholas Sanders, who was a recusant and a Catholic, and so absolutely against what Anne Boleyn stood, and her help in introducing the reform. Here I have put the original Latin to show how in his volume, De Origine ac Progressis Schismatis Anglicani, on the origin and development of the Anglican Schism, Nicholas Sanders decides to portray Anne Boleyn and to talk about her, saying, uno in superiore gingivo paulum prominebant, so she had an extra tooth that was prominent. In dextra manus, so in the right hand, a sextus digitus, so a sixth finger was born, and submento, under her chin, etiam succrescebat turgidum nescio, so that she had a growth, what we call today when. I would like to highlight here, so this in-depth description of her body also goes through, talk about her hair and her coloring, but also to highlight the mixed signals that are being sent here, because at the end he does says reliqua corporis proportio pulcrior videbatur, but the rest of her you can see had pleasurable and beautiful proportions. And this is something that is noted also by Eric Ives in his book on the life and death of Anne Boleyn, and he comments on this specific passage saying, apart from the evident self-contradiction of the last sentence, Sander, born in 1527 and in exile from 1561, and this is important because Anne Boleyn was decapitated in 1536, was hardly a contemporary witness of the events of Anne's life, or an expert on the vagaries of female attire in earlier generation. He mentions that, Sanders mentions that because of Anne, when she would wear high neck gowns, which is untrue, also because high necks came into fashion after Anne's death. There is more to it than that, however. There is more to it than just, this doesn't really clog, this doesn't really make sense because of inconsistency and because of how would Nicholas Sanders really know that, because Christopher highly highlights there is something else going on here in the way Anne Boleyn is being representative. He says, once we understand how Anne came to embody heresy, her alleged physical deformities take on added significance, resonating with discourses of monstrosity in 16th century religious polemic. Protestant satirical prints depict Catholic error in hybrid human-animal figures, such as the Pope ass monster and the monk calf monster, while Catholic texts show Luther as a seven-headed creature and play with the idea that Henry VIII had added the usurped headship of the church to his own natural head. Paul remarked that the king had two heads, in which he was surpassed only by Kerberos, who is pictured with three heads. Anne Boleyn's extra finger, protruding tooth, and unsightly wen make her only a slightly less exotic version of these outlandish emblems of religious deviancy. So there is this idea that Anne Boleyn portrays, that the way Anne Boleyn is being portrayed is being connected to ideas of monstrosity and religious deviancy. And it makes sense for that at the time of production of this text. However, these ideas still persist today. It is interesting that Susan Bordeaux, in her introduction to her book, The Creation of Anne Boleyn, states just this: Anne Boleyn looms large in our imagination. Everyone has some tidbit of Anne mythology to pull out. She slept with hundreds of men, didn't she? I heard that one from a classical scholar. She had 6 fingers, or was it 3 nipples? From a French literature expert. She had sex with her own brother, from anyone who had learned their history at the foot of Philip Gregory. So these stories continues today, and they continues to be repeated, for example, especially in oral forms or in new rendition of our imagination of Anne Boleyn. So I will argue that, yes, it's true that a lot of these images have to do with Anne Boleyn's religious deviancy. However, I would say there's something more to it. She was a different kind of paradox that is not at all really a paradox, but a complex, vibrant, and intelligent woman who changed our contemporary social and political landscape. The image that has been made of her by Sanders is akin to the Catholic human hybrid, as Hiley states, but she's also something else. She's a woman, powerful and hated, who is made to be not the liminal human animal. She's not, for example, the white doe of Wyatt's poetry in Who's Ulysses the Hunt, but she's something much worse. She's a woman, and a woman who deviates from the accepted and acceptable standard in every possible manner. New scholarly works are finally also calling attention to these mechanisms, revealing the way myth and fiction work for and against Anne Boleyn. I've mentioned Susan Bordeaux's The Creation of Anne Boleyn, and this book is part of a duology, or what is now a duology, along with her 2017 book, The Destruction of Hillary Clinton. Indeed, Bordeaux connects the two as having been subjected, quote unquote, to the same kind of poisonous alchemy, one in which truth is turned into mythical fiction and then passed again for truth, a more convenient, possibly, truth. In a way, then, Anne Boleyn is as much of a celebrity today as Hillary Clinton. Even there, the blurring between the politician and the famous woman complicate the discourse. And I use here the definition of celebrity as put forward by Greg Jenner, not a relation. He states so in his own book, Dead Famous. His definition of celebrity is a unique persona made widely known to the public via media coverage, and whose life is publicly consumed as dramatic entertainment, and whose commercial brand is profitable for those who explore their popularity and perhaps also for themselves. So this is to show that both Anne Boleyn and Kim Kardashian, in my case, fit very much this definition. I have mentioned, again, Hilary Mantel's words in her podcast, stating that the internet is abuzz with stories of Anne Boleyn today, as if what happened to her was happening today. Death then becomes irrelevant, as both Anne and the way we talk about her persist. And the rhetorical modes in which we talk about her persist in the way we think about these women. And I'm going to show how this connects also to our girl Kim. As we can say here, the timeline of her life seems much smoother than Anne. However, there are a lot of factors from the OJ trial to her rise to success that create this kind of gaps that leave open to interpretation, to reading her body as a text in itself. Here I've also grouped some of the headlines and a tweet from Kim herself showing that from the year 2011 in season 6, episode 3 of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, when we see Kim getting an x-ray to show that she does not have butt implants, to an headline in this year of our Lord 2021 that states, "Is Kim Kardashian's butt real?" Which we're still having this conversation, and we've been having this conversation for 10 years. And this I want to state independently of the fact whether her butt is really real or not. What is interesting is the discourse and the way we've been talking about that. Of course, a lot of this you can say is clickbait culture, a rhetoric employing that has a lot to do with the culture of capitalized visualization and consumption of information on the internet. You will not be wrong, of course. However, there's more to it. After Kim's terrible robbery in Paris, journalist and writer Pauline de Lassus wrote a book about the happening of that night, titled La Nuit de Kim Kardashian, published by Grasset. And I wanted to show you a few snippets from this book and analyze the language and show something in particular that has to do with the treating of Kim Kardashian's butt and how it reflects on her persona. So here, the first one is in one of the earlier moments of the book, she talks about her sex tape, quote unquote. And she said, "Ces seins siliconés sont souvent découverts et son incongruence derrière moulée dans des robes courtes." So here she's talking about her after her divorce when she becomes famous alongside Paris Hilton, and says her breasts were now silicone based, are uncovered for everyone to see, and her prominent butt is shown off by short skirts. And here is where the language gets really, quote unquote, interesting in a way, or a bit skeevy. She's the Oriental brunette, small, voluminous, with the eyes with black makeup, while her friend Paris, she's the Nordic with pink and rosy cheeks and an athletic silhouette. So here it's clearly to see the language of othering, of comparing Kim with Paris, and also the use of the Oriental. We've seen in some discourse yesterday about Kim and race. Here there is no space for talking. There's no space for talking about her race or for she is the other in this narrative. And here, talking about her videotape, she says her butt se fait surtout sa marque de fabrique, her brand, are déjà volumineuses, are already voluminous, encore naturelles. They're still natural. So here is the assumption of Kim having done something to her butt. But really, the question that I wanted to ask myself and just ask is, why is this here? This is a book called La Nuit de Kim Kardashian. Yes, it is about Kim Kardashian, but this is about the happening of that fateful and terrible night. How does it make sense for this kind of book to have this kind of emphasis on her body and this kind of language associated to her body? I've counted there's more than a half a dozen other mentions besides this of just her butt. Now, I do not think that the text is establishing a connection between Kim's body and what happened to her in Paris, or at least I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt and not think that no matter how much of a naive fool I might look. But the question still stands. And the answer, I believe, lies within the acknowledgement of the power and allure of these folk tales, which found a great and effective new media in contemporary social media. However, I want to highlight how this is a discourse that precedes social media, that belongs to the way Anne Boleyn was taught of, and can go back to the medieval tradition of the exemplum and then the example of women as vices, bringing suggestions that then what is outside of the body reflects what is inside. And in this case, implying or giving space for the interpretation of a fakeness of the body somehow relating to a fakeness of the person and not only of the persona. This is because we have something that we call binary thinking, that beast that, like the mythical Hydra, will not die without a vigorous fight, the powerhouse that feeds discourses of gender as we well know it, but also on corporeality. In fact, the division between mind and body, clearly defined and introduced in the early modern period, is also fruit of the body and soul division that divided, but also occupied a lot of the medieval and theological thought. This division still survives today, abetted by the many existential theories it has fed. It would not come as a surprise then that from its theorization, the mind became the realm of men and the body that of women. Now, I'm not saying that women are then thought to be owners of their own bodies, because unfortunately not always and still they aren't, but that there has been a clear demarcation in which great minds are men and beautiful bodies are women. And even in their deviancy, Anne Boleyn and Kim Kardashian are beautiful bodies. I've highlighted the paradox of Nicholas Sanders talking about the beautiful proportion of Anne Boleyn, and Kim, there's no denying that she has changed the perception of contemporary beauty. And this is a rhetoric that continues to be effective despite new theories on embodied cognition. Now, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy defines embodied cognition, talking about how it rejects or reformulates the computational commitments of cognitive science, emphasizing the significance of an agent's physical body in cognitive abilities. Unifying investigators of embodied cognition is the idea that the body or the body's interaction with the environment constitute or contribute to cognition in ways that require a new framework for its investigation. So by stating that we learn not only through our mind, but through our bodies, embodied cognition is giving us the chance to disprove the existence of these harsh borders between mind and body, and to recenter the body as a key player in the way we experience the world. So it is not, but then this rhetoric mode still exists, and that is because of these paradoxes that also exist in thinking about the separation of mind and body. And they subsist because they're not necessarily any less complex than the truth, only more familiar, as it keeps attaching itself, or rather we keep attaching it to controversial women we do not understand and cannot understand through any other existing acceptable paradigm. And this is why the deconstruction of such mechanism is so important, because it is possible to understand these women and other women like Anne Boleyn and Kim Kardashian. For example, Hilary Mantel herself mentions Marie Antoinette and Diana among the other royal female bodies she talks about. To understand these women then through the creation of a new and unacceptable discourse. So in the end, to draw some conclusion by showing these mechanisms, it is not surprising then that someone like Kim found a new calling in matters of justice and prison reform, because at the heart of such matters, there are questions that are fundamental to the ethics of personhood. In a similar way to Anne Boleyn, who surprisingly, or hopefully a little less surprisingly now, approached and espoused the reformation of a church that at the time relied heavily on exclusionary privileges. Because as much as they are personae, they respectively are and have been persons made of ambitions, right and wrong decisions, good and bad intentions, who because of that deserve a complexity of discourse that respects that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Roberta. That was absolutely wonderful. And oh my goodness, I have I have so much to think about from that. It really, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so as I said, we're going to have both papers and then questions afterwards. So please begin to think about questions. Feel free to put things in the chat as well. I'm going straight on to introducing our next speaker. The title of this paper is "The Personal is Political," Kuntina K. Klakalakis. And our speaker is YIORGOS ZAFIRIOU from Sydney in Australia. YIORGOS is an interdisciplinary contemporary visual artist who's recently completed a PhD at Sydney University in the College of the Arts there. YIORGOS maintains ongoing participation in exhibiting work and regularly undertakes live performance. His research focuses on drag and its relationship to queer identity. His own drag interrogates intersections between sex, gender, sexual orientation, and ethnicity, and is explored through the lens of the carnivalesque grotesque. So YIORGOS, I'm handing over to you.
Thank you very much, Meredith, and it's been a wonderful to participate, to enjoy the conference, but also to the Kimposium, but also to participate. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm presenting from the Gadigal country of the Eora Nation in Australia, and I want to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. The slideshow is going to play on a loop, and I'm going to just present. So my presentation is about discussing who is Kuntina really, and in a way, in saying that, is who is Kim. Today, I'm going to transverse the territory of persona politics, the cult of drag celebrity, the embodiment of ethnicity, the theory of objection, and some further thoughts on feminism in the most brief way I can. I have 5 minutes and I'll do my best. I'm proud to say that over the 20 seasons of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, I haven't actually seen one episode. I know who they are. I love what a cultural phenomena they have become, and I do follow what they actually do, mostly from news sites and from other popular media. My favorite clip is of Kim offering an explanation of her architecturally designed sink that was broadcast on ET's YouTube channel. If you Google Kim explains her sink, you'll find the 2-minute video. I spend far more time imagining who they really are. Who are they really? Are they real? I do this rather than watch them because I love the mystery of how I imagine them. Like my own family, an ethnic archetype. In a way, why would I watch myself on television? I also grew up as an ethnic outsider. Both my parents are Mediterranean with ancestry from Greek Anatolia. My understanding of ethnicity is complex. This is especially key in this country where blonde hair and fair skin was once desirable as the archetypal Aussie. Dark and curvy though, Kim and Co is all about ethnic womanhood. The emergence of the Kardashians into the popular imagination pushed the boundary of what beauty aesthetic is acceptable and celebrated. But this push at the boundary of beauty has its limits. The market corrals the Kardashians into submission. Kimono was too cultural appropriation. Corn braids, ditto. Too much bronzer was blackface. For ethnic people, this is what we wear to go out on a weekend. So like good shops, good capitalists, they yield to they've yielded to the market and got educated. Drag is an escape into the creative flow, into a fantasticalness of the creative imagination of carnival. It's as close as being a Kardashian as I can get. In my world, drag has created an alternative family. We have a familial sisterhood, a close circle that I can rely on. I also belong to a troupe called the Glitzy Glamour Glitter Girls, where the makeup, perfection, flawlessness, preening and posing, parties, social events, launches, and night outs are all added extra. It's the ultimate real fakeness in a way. Once we're in public, dealing with the paparazzi, everyone wants a photo with us. Everyone wants to be us. In the performances as Kuntina K. Klakalakis, I draw from my Greek heritage. As Kuntina, I become fabulous, amazing, and absolutely tragic at the same time. Exaggerated and augmented with a distorted face and a receding hairline. Kuntina is a slapstick critique of classic feminine drag tropes and a commentary on the commodification of drag as art. The carnival grotesquerie as Kuntina is a challenge to ideas of beauty, the grotesque sitting hand in glove with the abject. It is a shocking confrontation of the self. The lure of pleasure offered by carnival gives rise to this grotesque body, which is extreme and unruly. She's an experiment with exteriority at the margins, yet another facet of myself. The genesis of this performance began about 20 years ago. I created a performance called Shocking Stocking Dolly. She was disturbed and disturbing. Like Kim with her shapewear, I now see her with echoes of diversity and inclusion from an earlier time. I wore my friend's dirty stockings, a second skin. For the radical cross-dresser I am, this was also a subversive nod to the trope of transsexual perversion reinforced and popularized by Hollywood. For the glitzy glamour glitter girls, we're best described as a non-paraphilic social exhibitionistic drag, engaged in a queering of traditional stage performance. The performance isn't simply being on stage, it's just initiated by the space we inhabit. With a loose group structure, this troupe is about party being central to our ethos. There is no formal start or finish to the performance. It begins when we show up and ends when all the glitter is gone. Wow, I covered a lot in 5 minutes.
You sure did. And you know what, as I said about another one of the 5-minute papers, I think, you know, people who have to keep to 5 or 10 minutes pack a remarkable amount in. Yeah. Really, really wonderful. Really, really well done. Thank you, Yorgo. Thank you, Roberta. So much to unpick there, so much to think about. In fact, so many intersections between your work, and you're getting thank yous in the chat, and I'm betting a lot of hits on your social media too. Probably, you know, my best image is Shocking Stocking Dolly against, at least in my mind, against the Skims images. So pretty amazing. Let me just see if there's any questions here. Just comments, congratulations in the chat so far. So, Paul Thompson has a hand raised. Please go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, thank you very much. Am I unmuted? Yeah, okay. A couple of really great papers there. I want to speak to Roberta. Roberta, we've probably had this conversation before in real life. I've been scratching my memory to think of somebody in history who is comparable to Anne Boleyn or Kim Kardashian. The only person I can come up with being Cleopatra, whose folk tales persisted certainly to Shakespeare's time. And then along later comes Blaise Pascal and makes a comment about the physiognomy of her nose. And that goes forward into the 20th century and crops up in Astérix le Gallois, Astérix et Cléopâtre. And I'm just thinking there are 3 massive gaps between Cleopatra and Anne Boleyn and Kim Kardashian. Can you think of anybody else whose folklore fills those gaps, or indeed why there should be these massive gaps between these fascinating female figures of whom there is so much folklore.
Yes, thank you, Paul. I do think that, like, maybe not necessarily in the same amount of uncanny similarities in like stories or exactly the same way, but I do agree with Hilary Mantel that Lady Diana, Princess Diana, has been subjected to very similar kind of. She mentions the episode of her first picture where she had that skirt, and because the light was from behind, you could see her legs, and then everyone started only talking about her legs and then focusing on her body, and like how her body was like up until the last moment of her life was very much the focus of who she was or who we thought she was. I was looking, I've been trying not to embark with this as a big project, but I suspect that if I were to dig more, I could find something on. I was finding some very paradoxical tales on Empress Matilda in the Middle Ages. Definitely something of examples of disrespect, of not using her title to using her assertiveness as bossiness. So a lot of similar rhetoric thing, not as much on her body, but I suspect that if I were to dig a bit more, I might find something more. Yeah. I suspect there's more.
I wonder if also figures like Wallace Simpson, you know, who kind of disrupted the royal lineage, where, you know, and there was rumor mongering that she had betwixt, you know, through some sexual magic, the sort of, you know, king of England. So there is a long lineage.
Yeah, great answer there. I've got another question that's come up in chat, but before that, I want to say that someone did suggest, we've had suggestions here of Lucretia Borgia, Jane Mansfield, and Marilyn Monroe, of course, and can I suggest as another contemporary one who really fits well with some of Yorgos' points about ethnicity, and that is, of course, Meghan Markle. So I think, you know, perhaps we're just aware of so many because they are contemporaries of us, but I'm sure that Anne Boleyn, Cleopatra, etc., also had contemporaries in a sense. It's just that they're the ones who've kind of worked their way through time. I want to read this question out from Eleanor. It's for Roberta. And Eleanor says, I was struck by how much medieval and early modern narratives on exemplar execranda have persisted to this day. In particular, I'd like to hear your thoughts on Anne and Kim's bodies scrutinised because systems, media and the patriarchy want them to be examples of vice and or not to imitate, and how that agenda of controlling what acceptable, virtuous womanhood should be is enacted, and on the fact that they keep the focus on their bodies because their intellectual side, e.g. prison reform, religious studies, would destroy their binary of virtuous, vicious womanhood.
Yes, this is exactly how the narrative functions, is exactly the aim of these stories. Also because I feel there is, this is part of, I also had to pack a lot in 20 minutes, but there is something of the definition of the myth of something that is an image that is shared collectively, but also it's an image that replaces something that collectively also we are not able to accept, we are not ready to understand. And in a way then these folk tales, and I use folk tales because there's a lot of like word sort of like a lot of oral transmission here, but there's a lot of the mythic of not understanding and then replacing what real complexity looks like to a complexity that we are more familiar with, that certainly favors the patriarchy, favors the way capitalism wants, you know, to be one or the other in that specific thing. And it is not something that is just capitalistic, but has, as you point out, has roots in the example, in the I'm thinking of as a medievalist in the sermons. I work with a lot of sermons in which women are terrible, worse than animal. Thinking about Salome, thinking about Judy, some of the women I work with on a daily basis, in which they both do the same thing. They cause the decapitation of a man, but one is good and one is bad. So it's not the action itself that makes them bad, but it's how they enrich a certain narrative, how they enrich, in this case, the religious narrative. One is good and one is bad. I hope this sort of, like, I know I went a bit of a tangent, but I hope this sort of covers a little bit what I've been trying to say in terms of, like, this is the aim 100% of these kind of narratives.
Yeah, thank you. We've got lots of chats, bits, suggestions of names mainly in the chat there. I've got a sort of a question for Yorgo. You know, I love that point you made about some of the accusations of cultural appropriation against the Kardashians because of their heavy use of blusher, for example. And you related that, you know, in their earlier days, and you related that to, you know, so-called ethnic or, you know, Mediterranean people people of Mediterranean origin in Australia. I'm trying to put this in a global context, you know, use of makeup. But I'm also wondering about the Kardashian appropriation of drag makeup. So, you know, what is to stop drag communities or drag families like your drag family saying, hey, you stole our look, you stole our makeup styles?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting point. I mean, I think that cultural appropriation is a largely made up thing. I think that it's used as a vehicle to corral and control and to demonize. And I mean, I think that the boundaries of cultural appropriation should just be non-existent. Like people should just be able to use everyone else's culture in a way that's respectful, but still has, you know, boundary. But there's a lot of discussion in drag culture that women who actually do drag and present as drag, that they're indulging in cultural appropriation. I find that these fascinating discourses. I think that the boundary of what is and what isn't sort of gets moved, and I think it's part of an outrage machine. When I saw the bronzer one, I thought, oh, this is just gone, this is just tipped over. You know, the discussion last night about kimono, and that there was some genuine heartfelt outpouring from some significant figures in Japanese politics, in Japanese culture. You know, there was a merit to that discussion. But I think the corn braids and the bronzer, I thought that's another swing, you know. But you know, it's a discourse, so it's always subject to discussion.
Yeah, and so I think it's the spectrum too, you know, from I don't know if kimono is the worst, but you know, from bronzer to kimono, it's a big spectrum.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah.
I think we've got a couple more comments in the chat. Just comments, not questions. We have run to the end of our time. We can keep going a couple of minutes longer if anyone who hasn't had a chance to ask a question yet really has something burning. Oh, Catherine, yes, go ahead.
It's a very interesting conversation, both in when we talk about cultural misappropriation, but also to the reinterpretation of someone's image, because what, you know, like it's sort of, she's a saint if she does everything right, but the minute she does something wrong, she is the whore. And that's a really, that's a cultural thing that we need to look at changing, I think, as a modern society, because that's basically what's happened to all these people in history, isn't it? they were put on a pedestal and they did wrong, so suddenly they become whores through history, maligned as such. As for cultural misappropriation, I think that's a very tricky subject, because it's also extremely selective. You know, the cultures choose to decide what is offensive and what isn't. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, I'm from an Anglo-Fijian family, so all of my upbringing is European. I was raised in Australia. All my clothes are from, you know, Australia or Europe. Am I culturally misappropriating by wearing these clothes? You know, and you know, I like Italian clothes. Am I culturally misappropriating Italian culture by wearing Italian clothes? And that's where I agree with Yorgos. I think it's a load of, you know, offensive things that I won't repeat.
Thank
But that's
you.
all I've got to say.
Thank
and
you.
I think generally there is a I think that that social media, the speed at which we're able to sort of communicate, you know, has manufactured this outrage machine where a principle such as cultural appropriation, which may be, you know, gets escalated and it becomes, you know, it does get blown out. So like I said, it's a fascinating discourse, and it's been interesting to be privy to some of the discussions, because the Kardashians are, you know, they're important sort of pop figures. You know? So
yeah, we're running out of time, sadly. So Isabel, we haven't got time for your question, but it is there for Roberta to read. I just want to quickly say about cultural appropriation that, you know, I realize it's a very contentious topic, but the academic, you know, philosophical definition of cultural appropriation is that it's really only appropriation if the culture that's taken something is more powerful than the culture from which the thing has been taken. So it's about power. You are not culturally appropriating if you're a Fijian person wearing Italian clothes, but you might be culturally appropriating if it's the other way around. So, you know, this is obviously, you know, highly contentious, but that's the general academic understanding of what constitutes cultural appropriation. I realize it's incredibly complex.
I mean, I agree to a point, but when I was thinking about this today at sort of like at fair length, you know, and sort of Greece is one of the poorest countries in Europe, but the sort of Greek iconography is just, there's no even thought about, you know, drawing from it. And, you know, Greece is a country on the fringes of Europe. It's sort of, it's not incredibly wealthy to say it's a powerful sort of nation state. So like I said, I think the discourse is fascinating. And I think that power issue is sometimes used in a way that, you know, like I said, it manufactures an extra, but this is a discourse, you know, for
yeah,
you know,
and I think power shifts from minute to minute as well, Yorgo. Roberta, did you want to quickly say something?
Yeah, there's also, and I would say of cultural appropriation, there's also the economic sides. There has to be also that the one appropriating is making money, is making a profit off someone else's culture, and not like in a lot of like indigenous community, they try to do their thing and they don't get money because then someone else is doing it on a larger scale because it has a greater power over the market in many sense. So that also I feel very much is an issue in cultural appropriation.
Yeah, great. I'm really sorry we can't continue this. We have to have a break. Thank you, Yorgo. Thank you, Roberta. Thank you. My God, fantastic papers. Such deviant bodies, such deviant women's bodies, the feminine itself as grotesque, the feminine as drag, and what happens if you do it, let alone if you do it wrong, but what happens if you do it, head chopped. Thank you. I'm going to chop the head off this session now. Thank you. Excellent session. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.